Hello my lovelies, and welcome to today's video. My name's Alya and I'm really glad you popped in. So today we're talking about lazy eyes and why we do some really weird and scary things like patching children's eyes, like putting them in glasses, like giving them weird drops. And how does that impact us when we're 80 and 90 or 50 and 60? And why it's important to do the best to improve your child's sight, not just for when they're a child, but also throughout their whole life. So please do stick around if you're interested in learning a bit more about the lazy eye, or its proper term, amblyopia. So in all honesty, this is not my favorite topic. It's a little bit hard for me to get my head around, to be honest. I didn't really enjoy this at uni. I'm just not big on kids, I guess. I'm too emotionally invested in patients as it is, and when it's children it makes it all the more difficult. But then you also have this added component that my own son has a turned eye and has a bit of amblyopia, which has been more or less resolved, thank goodness. And this is what we're going to talk about today. But it's just one of those topics that I definitely wouldn't have started on. So clinically speaking, I don't really see much at all in children. So I don't really get to treat this very often, but I definitely can tell you all about it. And I can definitely tell you how that impacts people by the time they get to their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. And the truth is that, especially in the modern world, full of lights and electricity and gadgets and whatnot, it actually doesn't impact us too much. It's one of those things that may or may not come up depending on your career choice or depending on your social choices, but really in the grand scheme of things, not a big deal. So I can definitely start with that disclaimer. So let's get into the eye look as well and start talking all about why is it lazy? You know, what gives it that name? Why do we make a big deal about it in children? Why do we screen for it in children, especially here in Australia? I know that is a very big part of what the maternal health nurse is responsible for doing. Why do we make such a big deal about it when I just told you not a big deal? Well, the reality is it might be. And the biggest thing about that is that we do have two eyes for a reason. And even if the second one is just there as a bit of a spare tire, and should anything happen to the first one, it really is important to have two if that's what we've been given, right? So let's talk about the actual progress of why it becomes so-called lazy. Let's get some beige up onto these lids. So basically the eye itself is just a giant receiver. It's that's all it is. It's just a giant receiver. It's a bunch of cells, a bunch of pigment, a bunch of vessels and nerves, but they don't actually do anything proactive at all. You've got wonderful receptors at the back of the eye that absorb light. They instruct the brain whether they're seeing on and off, whether they're seeing red and green, you know, what contrast it is. They have thresholds so they can see how intense something is or not intense at all. Very, very intelligent receiver, but that's primarily all it is. What then happens to that signal is it gets divided up into different parts of the field. It's actually in quadrants, and gets sent off to the back of the head through the longest of all pathways in the brain, along the optic nerve. That all ends up landing in the occipital lobe right back there. So if you feel the back of your head, you're going to have these two little sticky out bits at the very top of your neck or at the very base of your skull. And it kind of feels like little bits like that. Or the occipital lobe or the occipital protuberance is what you can feel. And that section is all vision. It's all vision. It's all dedicated to all that wonderful, juicy information that your wonderful, intelligent receivers sent all the way back along that long journey. Now you get half your information from the left eye and half your information from the right eye in the ideal world. And then what actually happens at the brain level, at the occipital lobe, is that information becomes sensical. It actually makes a bit of sense, and it gets related with memory, gets related with perception, gets related with, you know, all these other knowledges that we have, and becomes the sight that we have, if you like, not just vision, but the sight that we have. So it also would depend on how much you notice, how much attention you pay, perhaps even influences the way you may behave to utilize your receivers, all that sort of cool stuff would happen somewhere through the connections back there. So what next? We've sent this message back, and then what do we do with it? Well, the reality is that we haven't considered what happens between the right and left eye. So we know a little bit about how the messages get back there. So we know that the peripheral vision, so the things that sort of happen to the external 25% this way and 25% that way, all get relayed back pretty straightforward. But then you have a central part of the field which actually gets crossed over. So your right eye is feeding into your left brain, and your left eye is feeding into your right brain, and all that kind of cool stuff. And that is part of the reason why the two eyes can communicate quite sufficiently together. The other way is that there isn't actually a connecting body between the right and left lobe at the back, and that also crosses over information, allowing the eyes to work completely as a pair. And that's really easily demonstrated for somebody that doesn't have any eye issues, and I'll just show you now. So when I look left, my eyes move together to the left. When I look right, together to the right. I can quite easily control them to get central, up, down, and all around. They're moving quite in a unified way. When you have a lazy eye, or that term, is coined from the fact that one eye will just not do what the stronger eye is doing. And a lot of the time it's got to do with nerve signals. It can be genetic, it can be through birth trauma, it can be just that one eye is simply weaker because the vision's not as good. It needs a little bit of help with glasses, and because it's not good, as the eye is developing, it's just not stimulated. Those cells at the back are not ripening, they're not filling up, they're not growing at the same rate as their other half, and they become relatively lazy. I'm just going to spray down a little bit of my misting spray here onto a brush, and that's just going to let me clean up just the movable part of my lid. It's also going to allow them to be re-primed. I don't often show you guys anymore, but I always prime my face with misting spray, and I always set my makeup with misting spray, in case you're wondering how I make it last. And this is beautiful. This is completely made of oils, so it's really good for the skin as well. No nasties in there. Okay, back to the eyeballs as they were. We now know a little bit about one of the ways the eyes get lazy. The other options, if it's not a vision issue, so it can't be refracted, or it's not a refractive amblyopia, which means it's not a matter of just increasing or decreasing the size of the image to empower the eye or balance the eye with its fellow, so basically fixed with glasses. The other option could be that the actual muscle or the nerve has gone through some sort of a palsy, some sort of a weakness, and that is something that can be fixed with a little bit of surgery. Eye muscle surgery, especially in kids, can be a little bit unpredictable, but in the hands of a very experienced surgeon, somebody who mostly does children, I would say at least 80% children, I would trust someone with a bit of experience to go ahead and do surgery if that's what they need. Ophthalmologists, in my experience, don't like to do surgery, not unless they're doing cataracts or something like that. Refractive surgeons love to do refractive surgery. Typically it's the other side, it's the kids surgeons. They don't like to do much more than just observe. So if they're already suggesting surgery, I would probably feel like I could trust them. Bit of mustard on the lid here. Yeah, so I would definitely listen to what the, not so much even the ophthalmologist is saying, but if you're seeing an orthoptist beforehand, and you will be if you're seeing a muscle person, or a lazy eye specialist, because they more than anything work with orthoptists. Orthoptics actually means straight eye. Ortho being straight, like orthodontics or orthopedics, and optics being the second part of the word for eyes. So classically speaking, that's all someone like me would do. Thank goodness we don't anymore, because I would hate my job. But it would, it's definitely something that we all know how to do. Getting back to causes. Surgery, glasses. The other thing you can definitely do, and you see this a lot, is exercises. This is definitely more appropriate once the other options have been exhausted a lot of the time, or if there is a specifically muscular component. And the most common thing, and this is the thing that I think scares parents the most, or especially scares bystanders the most, is patching. Now, it seems like a really weird thing to do. Why would you close an eye to strengthen it? It's completely counterintuitive, until you realize that what you're actually being asked to do is to close the strong eye to give the weaker eye a chance to catch up. Now, in my reading, in my practice, and in my experience with my son, the thing that has worked the best is to tailor a program that is best suited not just to the eye and the eye's needs, but also to the child and the child's capabilities. My son's squint was detected basically as soon as it popped up. So within 2 weeks of me first noticing it, he was already in glasses pretty much. So he's been very lucky. He happened to have a problem that I could recognize. But overall, it's something that can be addressed pretty quickly. And he did do some patching. What it does is basically creates that stimulation that was missing originally, creating the laziness. So you're basically forcing that eye to do work. You're making a lazy eye get up and mop the floor, get up and do its job, get up and do its chore. Yeah. So that in turn, especially in a small child, will then grow those cells, will ripen them, will plump them up, will make them active. And with a bit of luck and a little bit of plasticity, which all children under 8 tend to have, that will then catch up and become somewhat even. My son happened to be very lucky, and because he had 3D vision as a newborn, he was able to then regain some of that. A lot of kids that are born with squints don't regain 3D vision. And this takes me to my next kind of point, that yes, patching is amazing, and you definitely want to get the maximum amount out of that lazy eye. You want to give it as much therapeutics as you can possibly give it, whether it be glasses, whether it be patching. Sometimes even medication is used to make the eye blurry. There's lots of different methods out there, none of which are actually as scary as they may seem. I think it's only scary because it's the eye, and it's on your face and it's kind of obvious, so it's a little bit daunting. But I would say just trust your clinician. It takes time. It's a slow process. It's a process that should be regularly observed, whether it's roughly 6 weekly to 3 monthly, depending on your clinician, the condition, and your child. But there are different methods and different schools of thoughts out there. And the thing that's most common is, of course, the patch, because it's harmless. Oftentimes you'll find things like eye drops being utilized is if the turn or the laziness isn't too deep set, or the child is not very compliant using their patch. So they rip it off, or they look over their glasses, or they avoid their therapy. So therapy is bestowed upon them. And that's fine. There's no damage in the literature. There's a lot of literature on this suggesting that the eye drops are in any way long-term harmful. They just make the eye very sensitive to light, so the child complains sometimes. But for the most part, it works really, really well, and they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. Just going to grab my Savvy Minerals eyeshadow palette and get some beautiful shimmery colours out. So no matter what your child, or even maybe an older child, has been prescribed, what you have to keep in mind is that by the age of about 8 to sort of 12 would be the absolute limit, in my mind anyway, in my studies, your brain stops developing. Those cells stop having any kind of capability even to develop, let alone response to any kind of stimulus. So basically we call it plasticity. Plasticity refers to any kind of change that your body or brain will make. So the plasticity of the occipital lobe kind of taps out at around age 8. Some kids are just a little bit later in their development, and it could be as late as 12 years old. To be honest, in this day and age, the most kids that I see by 12, they look like little 16-year-olds. They're quite developed these days, between having less childhood disease, abundance of food, readily available hormones, all that sort of stuff, medications, all that sort of stuff. The kids develop really quickly these days. So I would probably safely say 8 rather than 12, but it's always worth a shot with these kids. By that point, the brain stops developing, basically, or that part of the brain stops developing. I swear with some people it feels like their brain just stops developing or never does. But in real terms, that's where we sort of stop even attempting any kind of real therapeutics. Then once we get past the 12-year-old stage, we can consider things that are more cosmetic. Especially if they're sort of closer to the 18 or young adult phase. Definitely if there's a big old turn, that eye's not doing much, at least make the child feel comfortable in their appearance, for sure. But before then, I will try absolutely everything in my arsenal to try and improve the actual functionality of the eye. Fast forwarding about 5 decades, you're coming up to a middle-aged person, or even towards elderly person, depending what kind of age range you're talking about. And they have got only one good eye. The other eye, for whatever reason, was missed as a child, was never given the patching opportunity, therapeutics, glasses, all that wonderful developmental options as a child. For a lot of these people, they were probably born during the war or something like that. It's all very much fair, well and fair, but unfortunately, for whatever the reason, they were not given the chance to develop their second eye. And as a result, they now might be developing, glaucoma, or they might be developing macular degeneration, or they might be developing, they might have diabetes. In any case, their eyes both are in terrible threat. And sometimes you're very lucky and you're very fortunate and you can jump in and you can fix it and people do quite well. But there is always that handful of people that can't be helped, at least not so much. They definitely can see an improvement, but they'll still be effectively sight impaired. So, in that case, at least then you have 2 eyes, right? And unfortunately, as these things go, a lot of times we see people lose their only eye or their good eye to, say, even something as simple as cataract is awfully scary to the surgeon to do, although a very common and very simple, relatively simple procedure, or a very common procedure on a person that effectively has one eye. When someone has a lazy eye, you almost feel like that second eye is like a glass eye, because if anything goes wrong to the good eye that you're operating on, then you're leaving them kind of optionless. The other thing is about treating that amblyopic eye, that lazy eye. A lot of doctors are a bit perplexed. For example, let's say somebody has glaucoma in both eyes. Do they or do they not treat the lazy eye? I'll give you an example why this might become an issue. You're probably thinking, well, it's still an eye, you're still going to treat it, right? You still want it to be healthy even if it can't see. Absolutely. And if that is the option, we do take it. But what if someone's particularly allergic to drops and laser isn't helping them? The other options for controlling glaucoma isn't helping them. What do? Do you make them extremely uncomfortable and in pain and have a constantly red eye that's blind anyway? How do you motivate that patient to look after their eye health when that eye is functionally a dud? You know what I mean? So it's a little bit difficult when you come to that third age and you have this eye that was neglected for whatever reason, no matter how good that reason is during childhood, it does eventually catch up with you as an adult. Functionally speaking, kids might not be able to catch a ball because they haven't got that proper 3D vision. In my experience, if they're dexterous enough, if they've got good enough other skills, other physical skills, they will catch a ball regardless of their vision. A lot of the time, if you could catch a ball with one eye closed as well, it's not necessarily the problem. Stop for an eyeliner break. The problem would lie mostly in 3D games, 3D movies, puzzles that require decent depth perception, things like that. It would not be in the general world, especially now that we have a lot of devices that help us along our way. So for example, if you're standing in a courtyard of some sort in the city where you're surrounded by many tall buildings, it may be difficult for somebody with a lazy eye or no 3D vision to judge, which building is the furthest away or the building that's nearest to them, because there's not enough information with size, light, and that sort of thing. But if you're driving a car, you can tell which car is ahead of you, which car is two ahead of you, and you have things that compare the distance. For example, the lines on the road, trees, other cars, things like that will allow you to judge the distance with relative comparison. So don't really use your 3D vision anyway. The other thing is, like I said, devices. A lot of cars will tell you what's going on around you these days. They've got all these sensors and whatnot, especially when you're parking the car. Most cars can more or less park themselves these days. I mean, myself, I can probably park anything. I've parked everything from a giant 7-seater or 8-seater van to, my old 86 Corolla, and it's fine. But my car now has a reverse camera, and honestly, that sort of stuff does make it easy even for a fully sighted person. So if you don't have full sight, there are still devices that can assist you, and that's totally fine. That's what I mentioned at the beginning about devices. So this world that we live in these days, it kind of makes everything quite ability accessible, and I wouldn't even call a lazy eye a disability. It's a little bit of a disadvantage should something go wrong though, and that's why I would highly encourage screening children, especially those who are sort of 2-3 years old, for any kind of abnormalities. And if they're past at 2 or 3 and there's a strong family history, or you're still suspect, every 6 months just routinely recheck them, because things can develop as their brains and eyes develop. As always with these videos, the makeup is a little bit neglected, but I have finally finished the look for you guys. I hope you like this little sunset mustard moment. I definitely enjoy these sort of more neutral but still bright and fun looks, definitely feminine. I hope you found the video informative. If you did like it, please do hit the like button. It really does help out. Subscribe and spread the word. If you're liking the content, please do tell other people that might enjoy it. Click share and comment below. And for more stuff, please do check out Instagram, where things are going up all the time. And as much as this wasn't my most favorite topic to talk about, I think it's very, very important to remember about all the different eye things that can happen, and just to be a little bit aware of them. Today was just a very much overview of the topic. It's a very, very complex and in-depth topic, as most things with eyes are. So I do hope you did enjoy today's video. Wherever you are around the world, my lovelies, I hope you're safe, I hope you're happy, and I hope you're keeping very well. And I can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye!